Welcome to Breakout Session 2, which is on regeneration and reinventing local places. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the session, and then I'm going to ask the key speakers. I have with me Councillor David Tutt, who's the leader of Eastbourne Borough Council. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
And I have Stuart Garnett, who is a director of Inspired Villages. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Stuart. And interestingly, in this session, we've got the private sector present and we've got local authority present. And hopefully it will become clear why. Generally, regeneration has been led in many places by the planning process, the quasi-judicial process of planning, which deals with, as we know, land use, building use, transportation, access to land, which makes it valuable, and has a whole process for establishing viability, controlling height, density, generates affordable housing, jobs, infrastructure through planning gain, Section 106, community infrastructure levy, and for a whole host of reasons generates housing and therefore council tax and buildings in which businesses can operate and therefore business rates as well. But that process is not without end. It has finite areas of land to work with. It is important that the process is used to protect areas of the environment and natural beauty and other areas. And therefore, we're in an era where really some of that toolbox has run out of steam in some areas. And what local authorities are starting to do is look at what other tools can they use to regenerate their areas. And some of those tools are digital. We know now that if you want to buy a house, you look on Cllr, you look on one of the web-based property apps, and they tell you all about an area. So those apps aren't controlled by local authorities. And so when they're telling the story of area, sometimes it's without the local authorities part of that story being included. But what they do include is how fast your broadband is. And it shows that people are making some of those selections on how digitally enabled an area is, not just on crime stats, not just on schools anymore. They want to know they've got super fast broadband into their home that facilitates, as appropriate, home working, home education, home leisure. And so there are many different ways of looking at regeneration. And because the private sector is a key partner in all authorities, then more and more the private sector are being asked to play their part in regeneration, both as part of a local authority supply chain and also as a partner in crime to deliver better communities. So I'm going to ask David to outline what's happening in Eastbourne. There are some fantastic initiatives that have been being delivered within Eastbourne. And then I'm going to ask Stuart to outline what Inspired Villages do and how they're creating communities from a private sector perspective, working in partnership with local authorities. And then we'll have a general discussion. We have about 45 minutes, so we've got enough time. Delegates can ask any questions along the way, and I'll make sure we address those. So, David, over to you.
Thank you, John. Regeneration's right at the top of our agenda in Eastbourne and has been for over a decade. If we can get the economy right, other good things just flow from that. So we've done an awful lot of work, and a lot of it has been with the private sector. When I was first elected as a councillor, I think that the sort of mood here and in other local authorities was, well, the local authority knows best, we will do it all. I'm really pleased that that's changed. Some ways out of necessity, because we haven't got the money to do it. Other ways because we can actually get far better results if we work with other people. And private sector has had a big part to play in that. One of the regeneration projects, one of the early ones, and it's over a decade ago now, you mentioned the importance of broadband and that's just such a vital part of infrastructure for any town. And we didn't have fibre into our properties or into our businesses. And one of the things that I ask when I go and see businesses locally, the final question is always, if there was one thing that a local authority could do for you, what would it be? And at that point in time, without exception, everyone said, do something about the speed of the broadband. And we spoke to British Telecom and we asked them when they were going to do something about it. Now, I may be being a little bit cynical, but I think they had a bit of a vested interest because they rented pipes, and though that rental was extortionate in my opinion, and particularly for short distances, but it was the only way to get a really fast service. And they were saying, well, you know, you're on a list and you're down there, and when you get to the top, we'll do something. That wasn't good enough for us, so we went to look for another partner, and we found a local a telco who were knowledge rich, didn't have money to invest, and we set up a company with them, a public-private company, so partly owned by the council, partly owned privately, that set up wireless broadband. And so we used we're blessed in Eastbourne by having the surrounding of the South Downs, where we've got a mast, which the council owns. We've got high hotel buildings and council buildings. We used that to create a footprint that covered the whole of Eastbourne, and we could put super fast wireless broadband in. That was really appreciated by the business community, many of whom very quickly moved over to the services that we can provide. So that was one example, like many other examples of the things we've done, but might be an idea to bring Stuart in at that point.
Stuart, tell us about Inspired Villages.
Thank you very much. Slightly odd, sort of see myself on that large screen in the background. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you very much for having me. Inspired Villages, we are a private operator of what's known as integrated retirement communities. We're probably one of the best kept secrets as what sort of a housing option, really. Many people know what care homes are, they know what sheltered housing is, the sort of McCarthy and Stone, and lots of local authority properties that are built in the 80s and 90s, and they know what traditional housing is. We're not none of those. We are providing independent living. It is for older people, so we look at people who are over the age of 65, and they've got to have some sort of care requirement. But ultimately, it's independent living, but with the access to facilities and care on site. The housing, the adult social care white paper that came out last year recognised that housing is a really important option for people as they get older to help reduce pressure on social care. We all know that the social care budgets are massively strained. It's going to get worse. Local authorities, there can be a disconnect between local authorities and county level, because county, of course, are responsible for managing the social care requirements. And so within our group, the body called ARCO, we've been campaigning to try to establish a task force, which government agreed to in the Levelling Up white paper earlier this year, to try to bring forward all the bodies together, so housing, social care, health, to join everything up. And that requires a combination between the private sector, public authorities, and all the communities as well. In terms of housing, it's often treated as quite a negative in this country, that that building on greenfield sites, density levels and this sort of thing. And what we've all got to recognise is that, as we move towards a quarter of the population being old, what are their housing options? Where do they go? For many people, they can stay in their own home, and that might be appropriate. But for too many people, they end up in care homes, and that creates pressures to local authorities and those budgets that I've just mentioned. So what we want to do is to work with the public sector and the private sector to help deliver more of these retirement communities, because it's a long-term investment. Our funders are NatWest Group Pension Fund and Legal & General. So where many people on this call may well have a pension which is managed by Legal & General. And so what they're in for is this long-term investment into communities. And Inspired Villages development would typically generate 30 to 35 jobs directly within the village, a whole range of roles from management, administration, down to gardeners, housekeeping, catering, as well as all the care associations and all the indirect supply chain. What we typically do is look to go into a town location or a village location might well be on the edge of these locations, because a village that we look to develop has a certain size requirement. But we're not a gated community. We recognise that millions of people in the country who are older, they might be living alone, and isolation and loneliness are massive killers in this country. It has a massive drag on the NHS, has a massive drag on the social care sector. So what we look to do is to run normally hundreds of activities within our villages every single month, whether it's a Tai Chi class or walking group, bridge classes, book clubs, all these sort of things. And we look to the wider community to come in and take part in these activities as well. The better that people's physical health, mental health, all the sort of improvements of balance and these sort of things are massive benefits. So we're not the sole solution to all this, but it does require a collaborative approach, working across sectors, across different departments, and together that there's an opportunity, because this sector has got real potential. We all saw the census data come out in the news a few weeks ago. This is a growing problem, and really from the private sector and the public sector working together to help deliver this. And a final part that I would just like to add, we have a group called Inspired Friendships. We took it over from Age UK down in Kent a few years ago in order to offer a befriending service, because there's hundreds of people in that local community who are lonely and isolated. And what we want to do is to roll this out more widely on a national basis as we deliver more villages, and working with other charitable organisations to help deliver access within the communities. And that might include things like such on the technology side of how people can use PCs and laptops and stuff to get about and order things, through to coming into the villages and taking part in activities, have a cup of coffee and cake, etc., to really be part of a community, that we don't just sit alone, it's not some sort of ghetto, and that can really sort of cross different generations and help for many people within all these communities.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to you, David. We've been through a pandemic, Brexit, Ukraine war. Now we are facing recession. There's been a massive impact on town centres. How has that affected your town centres? How have you responded to what's happening?
Well, again, it's not just down to the local authority, it's down to private enterprise. We've had a town centre which was looking quite tired 5 or 6 years ago. The main shopping mall was owned by Legal & General, is still owned by Legal & General. It was called an Arndale Centre. A lot of people had those back in the 1980s, 1990s. And Legal & General were looking to do something new. They looked at partners and they looked at selling, and we spoke to a number of people over a period of time. One of the things I think we did successfully as acting as a catalyst for regeneration as a local authority was to work cross-party. So together with my opposition leader, we agreed that we wouldn't allow regeneration of the town centre to become a political football. And so all of the statements we put out said in a joint statement, the leader of the council and the leader of the opposition said. So it didn't discourage that inward investment. We all know that control of councils can change hands, and so it's very important if people are looking at putting millions of pounds into your area, that you don't frighten them away. And we went through a bit of a roller coaster. There were good days, there were not so good days. But eventually we got to a stage where, with the cooperation of the county council on highways, with the help of the borough council using their compulsory purchase powers, buying up some of the old and run-down shops next to the Arndale, we managed to get an investment from Legal & General of £85 million to create what is now the Beacon Centre. So it's an extension to the former Arndale. And that inspired the county council to deal with the road layouts. So we've got really good new streetscape there, pedestrianised areas. which encourage people in. Legal in General have since come up with a new concept, which I find really exciting, because you've got to get the footfall into your town centres. And so just a couple of months ago, they opened something called the Foundry. And at ground floor level, the Foundry in Eastbourne is what was an old shop front, but it's got an amphitheatre there with steps, and they let that out and often don't charge community groups to come in and hold events. At the side of it, that they've got pop-up shops, pop-up stands, so that entrepreneurs who are trying to decide whether they've got a product that will sell, instead of having to take out a long-term rental at a high cost, can rent a pop-up stall for a month, couple of months, and see whether the concept works. Okay. Then as you go up those steps, you come to just a couple more retail units, and beyond that, running across 4 stores, and not obvious from ground floor level, they've got a really good workspace. So you become a member of their club, and that allows you a pass that gets you through the doors. They have hot and cold, not cold, hot coffee and tea permanently available, and sofas and comfortable chairs. So if you're a member of that club, you want to have a meeting with me, you can invite me in and we can have a chat over a coffee. Then there's another set of doors and another pass which takes you through to space that you can rent hot desk space on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And they've got individual small offices for 2, 4, 6 and 8 people. So they've been renting that out. That's been extremely successful. And so you've got all of those new workers, you've got the new audience for the community events that brings people into the town centre, and they spend their money in the local retailers. So that's been a really good innovation. And I believe that's going out now on, Legal in General tell me they've got 6 sites around the country. I think the next one's Poole. And so that'll be the second to open. So really good stuff there. But we've done a lot ourselves. So at the top end of our main thoroughfare between the railway station and the seafront, which is a desire path, people want to go down to the beach and to the sea and to the pier and other attractions. Right at the top end, there were a row of shops, and many towns have suffered from having boarded up shops. That row of shops had flats above, and the company that owned them weren't looking after them. And so they weren't even collecting some of the repair and maintenance monies that were due to them. They went into administration, and so we bought the whole block out of administration. And that has helped in many ways. So we've refurbished all of the shop units, all of the flats. The shops, whereas they were most of them were boarded up, we've now got new, we're branding it Food Street. We've got a really good new butcher in there. We've got a young lass who I bought my bread from during the lockdown, and because they delivered it. She started off, and she was in her 20s, she started off at a family home, baking bread, sourdough bread, and delivering it during the lockdown. She's taken a unit there called To The Rise, and superb offering there. Got a new restaurant coming in. There's a greengrocers across the road, good quality fruit and veg. And suddenly, from having boarded up shops, we've now got a waiting list to come into that area, which is just a tremendous turnaround. The flats are helping us with our housing needs. There's a lot of people needing accommodation in Eastbourne. We're renting those out. But at the top end, which has got spectacular views over the South Downs to the west and the pier to the east, we're renting that out as holiday lets, because again, it brings money into the council that we can invest in other projects.
Fantastic. Now, David mentioned the importance of unity of politics within an area. When you're talking to potential localities for delivering a village, how much are you influenced by the politics of the locality?
Yeah, I mean, we're very alive that anything that you're bringing forward into the planning process can typically be quite contentious. As an understatement. There are a whole host of these different models from integrated retirement communities. That there are urban models and there are rural models. People want to stay in the communities that they've been in for many years. And the issue that they have is that there's a lack of choice available to them. So often when we're bringing forward a scheme, that we are looking at what those planning issues are. But it's also to recognise that many local authorities just haven't planned to deal with this aging time bomb that's happening. And so what we have to do is carefully navigate through that process is to make people aware that this part about development often being unpopular because of sort of that how we're sort of made to think that it can be negative. But actually these type of developments have significant amounts of benefits attached to them. So for example, the job generation that comes with it, particularly as we look into this recession that we're moving into, that this is a long-term investor that's delivering here. That it's not something when we know traditional housing where it's homes that are built, sold, and that developer has gone, we're there forever. That's what Inspire Villages is. And that's what, and the same is true of other operators as well. So we have a vested interest into that community. So much like the reputation that exists from legal in general, that we want to be there, and what we say we will deliver, we'll stick to it, and we'll do that going forward. So for example, within our villages, it includes things like a cafe, a restaurant, a shop. It has a gym. It's got a swimming pool where people can take a membership and have access to it. And in many sort of smaller communities, smaller towns, smaller villages, these kind of facilities no longer exist. We've seen the local shops that have gone, and communities have a lack of transport attached to it. Within our villages, we provide a private transport service. So a resident who may not have the benefit of having a public transport service can use the transport service which we provide. The aim being that they don't need to get in their car. So when we explain it to local authorities, that there needs to be that better understanding of all these things. People have had a lot of broken promises from developers, and I think it's important within our sector that credibility and that delivery are upheld. And when people see it delivered over the long term, then that's massively helpful. Things like the commitments to local employment generation. So it's not just outsiders, as it were. These are all tangible benefits, and the more that political members and officers within local authorities understand that, then the better understanding. We have had some successes where local authorities particularly buy into it and are supportive of that. But what tends to happen is in local authority plans, there often isn't that connect between the social care challenges and from a district council as a decision maker. So I think a lot of this comes down to an educational piece. The more people see what we're about and become familiar with it and trust that as a product, in inverted commas, then the better that is for all of us, to give us confidence that that in a town centre this is something that you might want to see, or in other villages and so on, that's something that you want to see to keep people in the communities which they belong.
Thank you. We know growth is seen as a panacea. Inward investment, absolutely right for any local authority bringing money into the locality. But we also know that where growth has occurred, it's often left pockets of poverty, deprivation and inequality. How can we make inward investment and growth inclusive across an authority? It is an ongoing challenge.
It is. It's a considerable challenge, and we've got pockets of deprivation, as I mentioned earlier, here in Eastbourne. One of the main industry in Eastbourne is tourism, and that's perhaps down to the fact we're a seaside town, but it tends to be concentrated at the moment very much on the seafront and the South Downs area. So we've recently been looking at the areas within the town that have that greater deprivation, and saying that how can we enliven them? How can we make sure that some of the tourist pound is spent in their area. How can we ensure that it creates jobs for those who may have been unemployed for a long time? And so one of the things we've done recently is to engage with Eden Project. And again, with the County Council part funding, we have arranged, Eden have been down here for about 3 months. They've just reported to us, and we've got in the heart of the town sort of low-lying farmland, wetlands, which we've designated Eastbourne Park. And so we've asked Eden to look at that, because that touches right on some of those deprived communities, and it's about bringing the tourist out, creating jobs there, creating the opportunities for the people who live in the town and perhaps very rarely go to the beach or to the downs, because of course they just live within their own neighbourhood, to actually see some of the wonderful biodiversity we've got and the ecological opportunities we've got in Eastbourne.
Fantastic. In terms of inspired villages, you've talked about job creation, you've talked about a ticking time bomb of age, and that local authorities aren't always prioritising that. How does that time bomb play out over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And what's the answer to it?
I think that's the magic question, isn't it? That I think there's started to become a better understanding from government that you cannot keep burying your heads in the sand about this. That there has to be an appropriate response to deal with it. You know, that in terms of the scale of this challenge is so big, it has to be tackled. It's not true to say that, you know, everyone has to, if you're over 65, has to move into a retirement community, because for many people there are resistors to it. But I think what's important is that people understand the whole range of options that are available to them. You know, because many people don't know that this exists. So our model is a private one, but there are affordable operators there as well. So if you can't afford to purchase a property, then there are affordable options. Our residents tend to be self-funders, but again, that's important from the fact that reduces pressure on the care home system, and what you typically find is that it releases equity. So typically on someone moving into one of our properties, it frees up a significant sum of money, and we know that the over 65s have trillions of pounds of property value. What you want to do is be able to release that equity. That might mean that they're giving the money to their children, their grandchildren, to help them get a step up on the ladder. We know that older people have a higher propensity that they're going to spend locally. So in terms of their local communities, going out, and in terms of the reference of the grey pound, you know, it's particularly important that that's a local economic attraction. One of the things that we often look to do is to encourage people to come look in our villages, because people think that they know what it is, but actually coming into it and seeing it in real life tends to be a really important moment. And that's when we found that when we've shown councillors around and shown them what that product is, then often that they become major converts to how can we encourage this within our borough, within our district, and grow it. Because at a county level, that they'll typically produce a market position statement which says, you know, that they know from what they have to commission as social care, housing, you know, what does that look like? But they forget the fact that, you know, many over 70s, over 75 are homeowners. So what are the options for them? So from us, it's particularly that educational piece. I'd encourage you that wherever you live around the country, there will be a retirement community near to you. And I would massively encourage you just to go out and take a look at one, and to see and speak to the residents that are within these communities and ask them about their experiences. I have a direct experience. I showed my mum around one of our villages. She's now moved into a retirement village, not one of ours. My mum had lived by herself for about 20 years. You know, she's now having an absolute great time doing what she's doing. Running social clubs and so on. This wasn't what my mum used to be like. You know, she's massively bought into the idea of, you know, that that there's someone there to help look after you, but you still have that independence. And I think that the more people that come in and take a look at these communities, they'll see the attractions to it, and would definitely want to see more of these around the country to help with this demographic issue that we have.
Thank you. Stuart's talked about the importance of money going into the local economy. We know there's academic research around circular economy, donor economics. How does a local authority make that work through its economic development function, through its regeneration function?
By a variety of different means. A lot of it's down to place setting, I think, John. So a couple of examples of the things that we've done. We come back to the tourism area. Our secondary shopping area was looking a bit tired. There was a former car showrooms which had been taken over by a large payday loan company, and it was the narrowest point between the seafront and the secondary shopping area. So people only needed to step back from the seafront a few steps and they saw this payday loan. It wasn't the image we wanted to portray. We as a council bought that property, and there are flats above which we let. Okay? So again, it's a holistic approach. We're dealing with our housing challenge as well. But that payday loan company is no longer a tenant of that building. We've rented it to a community interest company, and that is now a set of artist studios, pottery kilns, etc. So it's bringing the community in, and the community actually involved in running things. A little bit further down the road, there was an old kebab house, and it was the sort of thing that private sector was not going to invest in because it needed so much work done to it. But it just looked totally wrong, and it was helping that area to run down. So we bought that. We have refurbished that. We've got 3 flats above, which was previously just empty space. And we've rented that again to the community interest company, and they rented out to the community for meeting space and office space. So you can change things around. You can be catalyst for a number of things there. I mean, I'm particularly interested in what Stuart's done. I had the opportunity to speak to Inspired Villages earlier in the year, and we're trying to arrange a visit up to the Lake District so that I can see for myself what they've done. But I think it is something that will become increasingly in demand, Stuart. I knock on a lot of doors. You'd expect politicians do that. We see it as fun. But I speak to a lot of elderly people, and their first instinct is that they want to stay living independently in their own homes. And with the sort of support that Lifeline and care services can provide, that can happen for a while. But many then need to move on to something else, and Stuart's right that the pressure on adult social care is such that adult social care often can't do everything that's needed, and those people, their health deteriorates to such an extent they find themselves in hospital, and then because there's not somewhere for them to come out to, they find themselves bed blocking, and that crunches up the whole of the national health system. That's one of the great log jams there. So the idea of them living in communities where they've got that additional support sounds fantastic to me. The community concept is something we have with our sheltered housing. For many years, when we open new sheltered housing, we've put in community restaurants. So it's not just about the residents within the sheltered housing unit, but we invite the surrounding community in, and we have events, and they can come in for lunch any day. But what Stuart's got in his product is taking it a step on.
So Stuart, plaudits there. How do you ensure that your villages are open and not gated developments? How do they become part of the communities in which they're established?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that the early models of these retirement communities were gated communities. In fact, some of the villages that we bought back in 2017, when the business was established from a predecessor company, that some of those were sold on the basis of that the facilities are for residents. But that's not the Inspired Villages model going forward. And the same is the case of many of our fellow operators. So often what we look to agree within the planning agreements is fairly onerous legal restrictions that ensure that those facilities are provided. We provide them on day one. So we want them to be available when the first resident moves in. And the basis of which, what facilities we're providing and when they're going to be open, and the access to the community. Because again, from that reputational perspective, we don't want to be offering something, you get your planning consent, you build it, you open it, and then you don't let non-residents in, because that's contrary to the spirit of what we're trying to do. So we want people to come in there. We want them to come in and have a coffee. We want them to come in and use the pool and the gym, and take part in all these activities. From a commercial perspective, there's obviously a financial benefit that goes with that. We're not talking massive amounts of money, but it has an important benefit from within our communities, which means that you can enhance the offer. In a village down in Maidstone in Kent, which we opened earlier this year, and we worked with the parish council because it's in Leeds Village near Maidstone. There is no shop in Leeds Village, and we agreed with the parish council the kind of items that should be sold in the shop. Because again, it's that from a local community, from these villages where they have lost a lot of their facilities, this is important. In a grand scheme, it'd be nice that we could be looking at things like post offices and this sort of thing, where even if they're open on a temporary basis, once a week, twice a week, because again, for older people who are not our residents in the local community, and even our residents, these are fantastic facilities to have access to. Not everyone wants to live in the town centre. If they live in a rural area, they want to stay there. So these things are particularly important. So it's important from a local authority, who are the decision makers, that they should be ensuring that whichever operator is bringing forward a scheme, get them locked down, ensure these commitments are held up, and then by all means monitor it. Because the more that local authorities see it and they trust all this, it becomes particularly important. And that's where we'll see more investors that are going to come into the sector. Already AXA, Aviva, Bupa, they're all involved in this space. There's a lot of long-term investment that's ready to come into the sector and reach out to many local authorities. At the moment, there's a handful of these schemes around the country, and really many local authorities should have 3, 4, 5, 6 of them scattered around to ensure that older people's needs are met.
Thank you. David, if I asked you, is there a magic dust? Is there something that assures you of regeneration? Are there some things you don't do? Are there things you always do? What would you say?
If there was magic dust, I'd have bottled it and started selling it, John. But there are certain rules that we set ourselves that we stick to. And so it's firstly about their corporate plan, and the fact that that corporate plan, all of the elements of that link together. So when we look at regeneration, we're not just trying to hit one target, we're trying to hit many. And it's about partnership working, and that's within within the statutory sector, so it's working with upper tier authorities as well as with other statutory services, so the health economy, but particularly with the private sector and increasingly with the private sector, and bringing your community in as well. So when we put plans forward, it's about consulting on those plans. It's about getting buy-in. Nobody wants to invest in something that nobody wants to be a part of. So it's making sure that you've got that support for what you're doing. I mean, another thing we've invested in recently is what was a fairly tired, just slightly out of town retail centre, and we purchased that. We've refurbished it, but the sort of tenants we've got coming in there lend themselves to our objectives, so decarbonisation. We've got one of the units now being let to a green energy company who are working with our local college group. So they're working on green initiatives, and they're a tenant of ours. We're putting electric vehicle charging points into that retail park. So there's a lot that you can do, and your community are behind you for it.
Regeneration is important to us all. Some of the measures have tended to be very clear metrics. increasingly well-being and happiness are being talked about as being really important. Stuart, how seriously do you take the happiness of your residents?
Yeah, massively. It's a core part of what we do. You know, that typically within the social care, personal care aspects have been very much focused upon the sort of the medical delivery of care. You know, that we're very interested about, you know, sort of the whether residents need bathing or being dressed, or you know, that sort of thing. Actually, we have to recognise that if you're older, that doesn't mean that you're past it and you're waiting to die. Your retirement, your later life should be the most important years of your life. You finish work, you know, you don't have to go to work anymore. This is great. You know, that what you want to do is live those years of your life as best as you possibly can. That's why we run hundreds of activities within the village. So the health and well-being is key. Of course, we recognise that as you get older, there will be increasingly complex health needs. So you might have to have some medication. You might need to have particular domiciliary care provided to you within the comfort of your own home. But if you're in your 70s, 80s, 90s, why shouldn't you be going to a swimming pool? Why shouldn't you be going on a walking group? And taking part in activities that are going to improve your mental and physical capacity. It will help us live longer. There's lots of reports that look in this. We ran a pilot study in one of our villages just before COVID, and you know, it ran for a few months, and even in those few months that we saw improvements to cognitive function, to balance, you know, all those kind of well-being indices that go forward. We'll roll it out. We'll run it on all of our villages and see those tangible benefits. So it's not just us saying, "Oh, come live in one of these communities, isn't it great?" Because we want to take your money. But actually, you can see and you can actually have measurable data which shows if you live in here, this is the output. This is what it's going to do to the quality of your life. A really important report that was published a few years ago is by Aston Research Centre, Aston University. I really encourage people to read it. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing when you see how it does reduce the impact on the NHS. It reduces the need for people to go see their doctor. Because if you're in these communities, you've got a bit of an issue, you might just go speak to a member of staff and say, well, I've got a bit of a problem. And sometimes it's that peace of mind, which then can just help reduce the need for you to go see a doctor and reduce that pressure on those stretched services. So all of this together, that health aspects and well-being are all important, and hopefully within that results in happy residents. We can't guarantee they're 100% healthy, happy about things. There are always going to be challenges that go along. That's life, isn't it? But hopefully we're doing many things well.
And David, realistic for a local authority to look towards a happy community?
Essential, not realistic. I mean, realistic as well, but essential. And so come back to involving your community and doing things that provide for a tourist town, not just for the tourist, but for the resident community. So we've invested heavily in the building that we're sitting in at the moment. That's helped our conference trade. We've got 2 theatres linked to that, but there are lots of community run events, and the investment that we have here has helped us, I'm sure, to win accolades such as the Turner Prize, which we'll be hosting next year. And so hope to invite many people down to Eastbourne for that.
Fantastic. We've come to the end of our time, so thank you to Stuart and David for your participation. That's it for today. Join us tomorrow as we return with our first segment about the Green Agenda, which is at 10 a.m. This will be live streamed onto the conference portal homepage. I do thank you for your attendance, and thank you to my guest speakers, Stuart and David.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. That's it for today.